Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. In this podcast, I wanted to propose an introduction to a framework for understanding and approaching Maoism-Third Worldism. This podcast, however, should be viewed as a beginning and not as an end. A more sophisticated exposition for many of the things that I will talk about here is provided in the book Eudaimonic Utopia, and a link to that book will be provided directly below this podcast. It is a free book, so you don't have to pay a dime. I don't charge anything for anything that I do. All of my work is done for free and always will be done for free. Basic idea, set the stage. Maoism-Third Worldism. The idea that the first world is not capable at this point of really starting a series of revolutions. In other words, the revolutionary or dialectical potential in the first world is not that great. And so, as a result, we need to look elsewhere. And where do we look? Well, where Maoist third worldists look is toward the third world. Now, I have discussed the subject of Maoism third worldism many times in this series of podcasts. So this will not be the first introduction to that subject. In fact, you might want to go back after listening to this podcast and listen to some of my earlier discussions on the subject. But what I will do here is somewhat more precise, and that is to provide a theory for understanding and approaching Maoism third worldism, which I really have not done, at least not in the way that I will do it now. The subject or the approach that I will be taking here is something called intersectional Marxism. Now, intersectional Marxism should not be confused with the theory or model of intersectionality, which was developed by the California law professor Kimberly Crenshaw, and then further by the Maryland sociology professor Patricia Hill Collins, and subsequently by a variety of other writers. I began using intersectionality in its form developed by Kimberly Crenshaw back in 1991. But I immediately recognized that there were some serious flaws in the way it was constructed. Namely, what both Crenshaw and Collins do is they talk about three major intersections, but others as well, but three major ones. And they are race, class, and gender. Now, from a Marxist standpoint, that is a serious problem, because what they are doing is they are putting class and gender on the same, race and gender on the same level as class. Now, certainly race and gender are properties of class, or I suppose you might say are the inevitable results of living in a class society like the United States, but they are not the same. Class is capitalism. Capitalism is class. You really can't put anything on its same level and still expect it to be considered a Marxist theory. Now, to be fair to them, neither Kimberly Crenshaw nor Patricia Hill Collins have argued that their perspectives are Marxist theories. But many other scholars, including myself, have tried to take intersectionality and to transform it into a Marxist theory. What I will be doing here is first what I just mentioned, trying to transform intersectionality into intersectional Marxism, and second, taking it one step further and transforming intersectional Marxism into Maoism-Third Worldism. I hope that makes some sense. Okay, we begin with class. We begin with class. Class is not an intersection. Class is capitalism. Class is, in a sense, another way of talking about intersectionality. Class is intersectionality. Class is the capitalist world system. There really is no significant difference between those terms. So when I talk about the social class system, either globally or in a particular country, I am talking about intersectionality. In other words, the social class system or capitalism is intersectional. It's not simple. It's not one-dimensional. Here's the way that Kimberly Crenshaw explained her development of intersectionality, although we will be departing from Crenshaw's intersectionality in just a bit. What she said is that she came up with the idea of a roadmap. And her idea was that when you have a roadmap, you have many different roads, streets, avenues, highways, boulevards, and so on. And each of those roads, highways, and boulevards can be seen as, in effect, different types of contradictions within the capitalist world system. So, for instance, one, let's just call it a boulevard or an avenue, might be race, one might be ethnicity, one might be gender, one might be disability, one might be tribe, which is still prevalent in many parts of the world, and so on. So we have these different intersections, these different structures, really, which exist within the structure of capitalism, which again can also be called intersectionality. Okay. Now, here's what I would do. And this is where I depart from classical intersectionality. Is what I do is I say, well, okay, let's assume that intersectionality is the capitalist world system, is class. And therefore, those different intersections that I mentioned, like race and gender and disability and so on, are different contradictions within intersectionality. So each of us, you, me, and the person sitting next to you maybe, has a different intersectional map. My map is not going to be the same as your map. Your map is not going to be the same as the map of the person presumably sitting to the right or the left of you. Each of us will have a different map, meaning a different framework of intersectionality. So the capitalist world system, the way it appears through me, is not the capitalist world system the way it appears through you. We are each distinct beings, and we each have ways of approaching intersectionality, therefore, in different ways. So, for instance, I can say, well, my race is seen as white, even though I don't personally regard it as white. Personally, I regard myself, as I've said before, as a brown person. After all, if Arabs are brown, why should not my brothers or cousins, or the brothers or cousins of Arabs, namely, Ashkenazi Jews be seen as brown as well? There is no real logical answer to that. Why? Because race is a social construction. It is not objectively real. And so we begin with that assumption that these intersections are constructed by societies, not real in any kind of objective sense. Okay, so I can say that again, my race is seen as white, although I see myself as brown. My social class might be considered as being nouveau riche or lower upper class because I am unfortunately a rather wealthy man. My gender would be considered as being masculine. My sex would be considered as being male. And of course, we need to bear in mind that those two things are not necessarily equivalent. There are people whose sex is one thing and whose gender is something entirely different. There are also multiple genders, 30, 40, I don't know, a lot of genders. There are also multiple sexes. That is called intersex. In other words, not everyone is male or female in the strict sense of those terms. There are some people who may be male in appearance, but may also have ovaries. There are some people who may be female in appearance, but may have testes. There are also some people who are not XX or XY, but rather are XXY or XYY. So neither sex nor gender are binary categories. They are both complex categories, as are all of these categories. When I talk about disability, I can look at myself and I can say, I'm an autistic. I've been an autistic my entire life. Autism is a neurological genetic condition. One does not become autistic, one is born autistic. I would not wish my autism on anyone. It is not a pleasant experience, or at least it has been far from pleasant for me. And yet, that is my condition. There are some people with muscular dystrophy. There are some people with multiple sclerosis. There are some people who are deaf. There are some people who are blind, and so on and so on. And then you have people with multiple disabilities, like Helen Keller, who was both deaf and blind. So it gets even more complex. So that is the value of looking at intersectionality in a multifaceted way, meaning that the social class system consists of many different categories, not simply one social class. Social class is the overarching category. Social class is what defines our society. Social class, in a way, can also be called capitalism. Social class is capitalism. It is the capitalist world system. That is how intersectionality works. And so if we want to eliminate the capitalist world system, we also need to eliminate intersectionality. Now, does that mean eliminating diversity? No, not at all. But it means eliminating the inequalities which are produced by that diversity. So, the fact that I am autistic right now has a very minimal effect on my life. Most people would not guess that I was autistic. That was not true many years ago when I was visibly autistic. and was literally out of touch with the world, had no sense of other people, could not communicate properly, could not understand what other people were saying in any kind of organized sense. So my autism has changed over the years. Not the same as it was when I was 12. I'm now 68. And so my autism now is very different than when I was younger. Same thing can be said about my masculinity. Is my masculinity exactly the same now as it was when I was a kid? No, not really. I have a much, I think, firmer appreciation of what it means to be masculine now than I did back then when I was a kid. In fact, when I was a kid, I would say that I really didn't understand what it meant to be masculine. And perhaps much of that was a result of my autism. But I had no sense of masculinity. What does it mean to be masculine? What does it mean to be feminine? If somebody would have asked me that as a kid, I would have fumbled and had difficulty coming up with the proper words. Same thing is true with ethnicity. If somebody said, "What is your ethnicity?" I literally would not know how to answer that question. I might say, well, my ancestry is Ashkenazi Jewish, but is that my ethnicity? Am I ethnically Jewish? I'm not even sure what being ethnically Jewish is in relationship to myself. Now, in relationship to others, I can, because I know some people who are culturally Jewish, who practice Jewish celebrations, who regard themselves as being Jewish, who define themselves as being Jewish, who are also very pro-Zionist, whereas I am anti-Zionist. Not that I'm saying Zionism is a necessary ethnic characteristic for being Jewish, but it is for many people. In fact, it is a defining characteristic of being Jewish for many Jews. Whatever being ethnically Jewish is, I don't think I am that. So I am kind of a conundrum, even to myself. I am not really sure what I am. uh, who are you, Mark? Who are you? I really don't know. Um, I fumble for words because I try to think of some characteristic that I can use that would summarize who I am intersectionally. What am I religiously? Well, yeah, that I know, but I don't talk about that in these podcasts. What am I ethnically? I have no idea. What am I in terms of race? Again, I define myself as brown, but I will never, ever forget the fact that I receive white privilege. That would be catastrophic. I could not imagine myself as not receiving white privilege because I benefit from it. Do I want to? No. But then again, I think, well, I am where I am. I am a multimillionaire. I have a Ph.D. in sociology. I worked as a college and university professor for my entire career. Would I have done those things and have had those characteristics had I not been perceived as white? And there we have a question mark. I literally don't know. Most people who get their PhDs proportionately are white. Most people who get their PhDs proportionately come from relatively well-to-do backgrounds. Most of us who get our PhDs have a certain amount of intelligence, which I guess can also be seen as a kind of intersectional characteristic. I mean, you're not going to find very many people with severe learning disabilities getting their PhDs. Are there some? Yes, but proportionately, no. So I know what characteristics define me, but I really don't know how to put those into a convenient sentence or to describe them in any way that would be meaningful to anyone, including to me. So what am I? I am nothing. I really don't know what I am. But whatever I am someone who occupies a given set of intersections. Those intersections are defined by my social class, or at least indicated by my social class. It is very unlikely that I would have a PhD if I were poor. It is very unlikely that I would have been a college professor if I were poor. If I were poor, it is much more likely that I would have had a very minimal paying job throughout my career. And it is also quite likely that my parents would have had a minimal paying job throughout their careers as well. So there is a certain kind of association between social class and these different intersections that I mentioned, but they don't exist in a one-to-one correspondence. In other words, you can't simply say that because I am this class, that therefore I am this race, I am this gender, I am this ethnicity, I am this religion, and so on and so on and so on. It doesn't work that way. Life is not that simple. So, when I look at intersectionality, my own intersectional map, what I'm looking at is the precise relationship between the different intersections I mentioned with one another. When I look at somebody else, it is highly unlikely that their intersectional map will be the same as mine. However, if they occupy a social class that is reasonably close to my own, there is a better than average chance that their intersectional map will be fairly similar to mine. So again, it's hard making definitive statements about these things because they're really just social constructions. We have decided that race matters. We have decided what the genders are and that the genders matter. We have decided what race is and that race matters. We have decided what ethnicity is and that ethnicity matters. My father, before he went to World War II, he's now been deceased for many years, told me that growing up, he was not considered as being white. He was Jewish. Jews in the United States, or at least in Brooklyn, where he's from, were not white. That's the way it was throughout much of the United States. Jews, Italians, Irish, and so on were not white. They belonged to a category all of themselves. Then my father went to World War II. Actually, he enlisted in the National Guard. I have no idea why. I would not have done that, but whatever. My father and I were very different. My father was very patriotic. I am not. But he enlisted in the National Guard. And when World War II started, namely when the Japanese government bombed Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, my father's National Guard battalion was transferred into the Army. And that is how my father ended up as an Army corporal and a medic by that process. Most people didn't do it that way. Most people were not in the National Guard, and so they were simply drafted into the Army from being civilians. My father was not in that precise situation. When my father came home from World War II, he told me, and I was a kid at the time, and I had a tough time making sense out of it. My father told me that all of a sudden he was white. And I said, "What?" Now, I had always, to that point, I was a kid, thought of myself as white, because that's what I always was told I was. I know that is still not universally agreed upon. Unfortunately, many people who claim that Jews are not white are neo-Nazis. I am making that argument for an entirely different reason. But my father said he discovered that he was white. And I honestly did not know what to ask him. I felt even then I should ask him something about that. What did that feel like? How did that happen? I know my father told me all these horrendous stories of how he was treated during World War II. He said that these two soldiers from someplace in New England, I believe New Hampshire, but that may not be right, came up to him and, with no attempt at hostility, as best as my father could tell, in pure sincerity, asked to see my father's horns. That's what they asked. They literally believed that Jews had horns. Why? Well, goes back, if you don't know this, to the idea of Jews as being Christ killers. And so the idea, I guess, was that if Jews are Christ killers, well, who would kill Christ? The devil. And so therefore, Jews must therefore have horns. And I don't remember exactly what my father said, but it was not polite language. He was not exactly friendly to them when they asked him that question. I'm not sure if I would have not been friendly, because I might have realized that these people were not trying to hurt my feelings. They literally believed that I had horns. But still, I can't blame my father for doing that. I think that would piss off almost anybody, asking somebody, where are your horns? Really, really weird question. I have not experienced hardly any anti-Semitism. I grew up in Jewish neighborhoods in New York City, the Bronx and Queens. Then we moved to the suburbs. So I never encountered anti-Semitism to any significant degree. The most I encountered it was when I was reading a magazine after the assassination of Jack Kennedy. And I became obsessed with Jack Kennedy after his killing. In the back of that magazine was an ad for another magazine which purported to show that Dwight D. Eisenhower, popularly known as Ike, and I will not use the profanity that this ad used, but I will simplify it and say was a gosh darn K word, the derogatory word for a Jew. I had never heard that word before. So I brought the magazine to my mother. My mother was steaming mad, not at me, but at the magazine. She grabbed the magazine from me and tore it into shreds. I must admit I was not that happy about that because I loved that magazine. In spite of what I had just found out was in it. This is back in the early 1960s or mid 1960s when those kinds of advertisements, classified advertisements, were relatively common in magazines. Are they now? No, not anymore. But back then, yes. Okay. So, since I know my social class, I can make some predictions about my intersections. If I know someone else's social class, I can make some predictions about their intersections as well, and so on and so on and so on. That to me is the relationship between class and intersectional Marxism. Note, I did not say between class and intersectionality. I said between class and intersectional Marxism, which is very different from the intersectionality developed by Crenshaw and Hill Collins. Now, let's take this one step further, then we'll wrap up. How do we take what I said and move it beyond the level of scientific socialism or Marxism to its current stage, its current sophisticated stage of Maoism-Third Worldism? Well, I think that is relatively simple. At least it seems simple to me. The kinds of intersections that one is likely to find in the third world are not going to be the kind that one will likely find in the first world. The third world, as I have seen for myself, having been to the Congo, having been to Mexico, which is just 2 miles from me, very, very different. Very different social classes. I don't walk down the street. Let me rephrase that. I have never walked down the street of an American city and seen dead bodies lying in the street. I did walk down the street, the main street of Kinshasa in the Congo, the second largest city in sub-Saharan Africa, and see just that. So what is common there is not at all common here. Therefore, the intersectional maps that exist in many third world countries and the intersectional maps that exist in many first world countries like my own are not going to be the same. Does that mean that all the intersectional maps of everyone in a given society will be the same? No, no. Because you have to introduce other factors as well. Those other factors, intersectionality. So it's a complex way, I think, of looking at the third world in relationship to the first world, but I think it is a useful one. There's more to it than that. I have discussed other parts of it in the past during my explanations of critical realism, as it was developed by Roy Bhaskar. I will return to that subject in the future as well, because now I kind of see my theory a bit differently than I did when I was a professor. I don't see my theory as exclusively critical realist. I see my theory as a kind of fusion of critical realism and intersectional Marxism. And so I've had to make some modifications to my perspective based upon my changing ideas. And I'm still making those modifications. And I assume I will make those modifications well into the future as well, for as long as I live, which may not be that much longer. How do I know? Maybe I'll live a week, a day, a year, a decade, few more decades. Nah, not much longer than that. Do I care? No. What I care about are the intersectional maps of people living in the third world. Especially right now, the intersectional maps of people living in Gaza, where the Israeli government has taken the lands of Gaza and an organization called Hamas and combined them into one. So that if you are a Gazan, then by definition, you are also Hamas. Aside from the utter ridiculousness of that proposition, it has resulted in horrendous amounts of human death. And so when I think about the intersectional maps of people who are drinking seawater and water that was used by women during their menstrual cycles, how can I even compare that to my own intersectional map, or for that matter, to the intersectional map of anyone I know? And I know some poor people. But first world poverty, however bad it is, and in some cases it gets really, really bad, I have never personally seen it rise to the level of what is happening right now in Gaza. Am I happy about that? That is a difficult question for me to ask. The only answer I can think of is yes and no. For myself, I wish I were in Gaza. I do. I'm not lying at all. I wish that I were in Gaza right now, suffering right alongside my Palestinian brothers and sisters. For other people that I know, no, I don't wish that. I have no right to wish that on other people, on other Americans. It's not my place to make that kind of an evaluation or that kind of a exhortation or desire or whatever you want to call it. I have no right to wish evil. The evil being perpetrated right now by the Zionist entity upon Palestinians, upon others in my own country. I don't have that right. But I do have the right to wish that upon myself. And I don't think that I am being self-destructive in saying that. To me, I'm just being Mark. I'm just being Mark. That's the way I am. I can't conceive of anyone suffering unjustly and seeing myself in relative safety. Just can't. I just can't. For the time being, this is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.